I'm sure by now you're all familiar with the Elder Scrolls Oblivion. It's by far one of the biggest games from its day, and still has a devoted fan base that continues to play it. 8 months after this gem was released, a small piece of DLC content was made available for purchase called Knights of the Nine. In my opinion, Knights of the Nine is one of, if not the best quest lines in the Elder Scrolls Oblivion, and is the perfect way to get new players into the game, solving many of the issues Oblivion has due to its old age. Because the game is so old and Bethesda loves releasing remakes, the Knights content is actually bundled into the Game of the Year edition, making it virtually free to anyone who already has the game on Steam, and there's no real reason to buy any version other than Game of the Year. While content and quests exist in the game that may be more grand or absurd, like the Dark Brotherhood or Shivering Isles for example, Knights of the Nine accomplishes something different, something no other quest in the game does for the player, and serves as the perfect introduction to Oblivion. Throughout this video, I'm going to run through the quest line and give my thoughts as to why I think it's so good, along with where there's room for improvement. The game is extremely old, and honestly nothing's perfect. Also, just a side note, I'm going to be playing through this quest on a brand new character, mainly because I think experiencing the quest early is actually a big part of its appeal, and in my eyes, it's how a new player would naturally come across the quest while playing. If you haven't played it yet, I recommend taking the time to pause this video and go try it out for yourself. The whole DLC is only around 4 hours to complete, and it really is worth your time. But without further ado, let's get into it, and I hope you enjoy. We boot into the world and we're greeted with the classic character creation screen. I'm not going to spend too much time running through the beginning of the game because that's not really our focus here, but I will briefly give some descriptions just for anyone who has never played the game to get a sense of how our journey begins. After messing around with some sliders, I decided Alan was as good as he was gonna get, and we're well on our way. We get a bunch of exposition on how we're a prisoner, and a whole bunch of other nonsense that really doesn't matter too much to us. If you haven't played the game before, basically the Emperor, that guy from the intro screen, is currently being hunted by assassins, and we, the prisoner, just got lucky enough for the secret exit into the dungeon to be in our cell. After some exposition and some more talking and exploring, he dies, and we need to deliver the sacred amulet that he wears to some random guy named Joffrey. So here we get to pick our birth sign and class and continue our way through the tutorial dungeon. I decided to go for a marksman build and try out some stealth stuff, so you'll see us using kind of a bow and dagger mix through the whole game. One thing I think is important to note is that because we have the Game of the Year edition, the DLC is already pre-installed, as I said before. This initially sounds like a good thing because you are saving a lot of money by buying the Game of the Year and the quests are given to you right away, but it leads to this really clunky feeling of random quests and items being added to your inventory while you're going through the tutorial. So because you don't have any context to what's going on, a lot of this can seem extremely overwhelming to a new player. This, I think, is a big strong point in favor of the Knights of the Nine, because the DLC there is not given to you randomly early in the game, but is naturally found while exploring the world, as we'll see later. Again, adding to the immersion and really making it feel like it slots in the base game and could have been there the whole time, had you not known you had just bought some DLC. After completing the tutorial dungeon and absolutely dunking on a bunch of goblins, we're greeted with an open world and options to explore wherever we please. So let's speed through a few things just to get our bearings in the main plot of the game and play through about as much as I'd say most people would before moving on to some side quests, aka Knights of the Nine. We go ahead and meet up with Joffrey at the Wayne Priory and give him the Amulet of Kings just as the Emperor told us. He basically says to find the illegitimate son of the Emperor, as this son is the key to saving the world from evil. So we go to the city of Kvatch that Martin, the Emperor's supposed son, is staying at, and find that it's been taken over by an Oblivion Gate, a portal to the world of Daedric god Mehrunes Dagon, which is this game's main antagonist. Before hopping into the portal to attempt to close it up, we get our first exposure to the Knights of the Nine, when a random priest talks to us about the attack on Anvil, the murders at the chapel, and the self-proclaimed prophet, ranting about the end of the world, which sparks the quest line to begin. Again, it really is amazing how well this slides into the base game. The dude is basically complaining about how things are just going from bad to worse, especially with the portal in Kvatch, and now there's attacks on chapels, with a prophet preaching the end of the world. Something that totally makes sense in the context of our experience so far as a player. This really is much more immersive than just receiving a random pop-up during the beginning of the game, telling us our mission, and it is something I really appreciate that goes the extra mile for immersing the player. Long story short, we destroy the portal, find Martin, and upon returning to the Priory, are told that the Amulet of Kings was stolen, beginning the main chunk of the story and pretty much completing what I would consider the tutorial or the beginning of the game. With that monkey off our back, we're free to move on and begin our path down the Knights of the Nine. We did come across this quest naturally at an extremely convenient time, but if it wasn't found there, you'll easily find it by talking to NPCs around the world and asking if they've heard any rumors, something pretty basic in RPGs and especially fitting the context of Oblivion, where a lot of quests are found through this rumor system. The quest speaks of a supposed prophet in the city of Anvil who is making quite a commotion over his rantings after the city's chapel was attacked, leaving many dead inside. And I really do love this introduction. It might be small and honestly pretty nonchalant for such a large piece of DLC, but I think that really lends to the experience. It can almost be too much when a quest right off the bat is basically telling you to save the world, save the universe, or somehow stop some evil villain from killing everybody else. Knights of the Nine instead comes off to the player as just another random event in the world, most likely due to the chaos we've been exposed to right from the beginning of our adventure. I mean, the Emperor literally dies in front of us 5 minutes into the game. This was part of the reason I didn't even realize it was DLC when I was first playing. The way we experienced the start of the game makes me really not question why an attack would be happening. I just assumed the world is in a state of turmoil, and this is just another consequence of that turmoil. Another neat aspect of this quest that I really appreciate is how different NPCs will give different opinions on the prophet and the validity of what he's talking about. I assumed he was kind of bullshit when I first played, not knowing what the quest was truly about. But hearing NPCs I respected giving different views on him left him as a big question mark, not knowing if he was full of shit or if he was actually telling the truth. Well, regardless of what you choose, if you head to Anvil, this so-called prophet will be there, yelling at literally no one as they all walk by his little stand. You have to at least respect the dedication. And if we head into the chapel to look around or speak to one of the guards in the area, it isn't a joke. The chapel has actually been attacked. Speaking to this so-called prophet, he begins to tell us that a threat has emerged from the darkness of the ages of myth to challenge Cyrodiil, that's where we are, and calls for a champion to meet the challenge. Again, this guy just sounds crazy, and at this point on my first playthrough, I still wasn't sure if he was lying. Through our dialogue with him, we can learn that Umaril the Unfeathered is the one behind the attack, and the only way to stop him from destroying the entire universe is to use the relics of the Divine Crusader Pelinal Whitestrake. Well, this is the big you must save the world moment I had just praised the game for not making before. I think in this context it really makes sense though. We obviously saw the attack was real, but still have no evidence that this guy, calling himself a prophet, knows anything more than we do. At this point, it really isn't clear if he's telling the truth, but his story is compelling, so let's hear him out. After getting more info on Umaril and Pelinal, two characters we'll dive into more in the future, the prophet asks us if we are a worthy knight. This dialogue can go a bunch of ways, but always ends in the same place. If we've made a lot of progress in the game, we can choose to tell him about our accomplishments and accolades that we've gained while adventuring. This is pretty cool, but he will turn us away, saying he doesn't need our help. In the end, we have to say no, we aren't worthy, and he accepts this humility to give us the next step in defeating Umaril. I think the idea behind this is pretty cool in theory, but the actual execution is kind of off-putting. Like, why does he prefer someone who thinks that they suck with no real prerequisite skills to someone who has actually done a bunch of cool shit and is more qualified for the job? That just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. That being said, I love how this alludes to new players taking on the role and no prior deeds being necessary. This is a trend we'll see continue through the questline, but is part of the reason why I suggest playing through this early. There's a lot to like here as a new player, and the entire line does a great job of getting newbies accustomed to the world. Well, with us telling the prophet we basically don't have a resume, he believes in us, so that's good enough. His guidance is for us to visit the 9 way shrines located around Cyrodiil to repent to each of the divines for our misdeeds, and gives us a map marking their location. Note that it doesn't actually put their location on our map, but he instead gives us a piece of paper with the general area to search in written on it. Again, I like this a lot from the new player's point of view. It's a great excuse to explore the world and visit each of the major cities in Cyrodiil, getting comfortable with the entire world at once. thanks to the shrines being spread out pretty evenly throughout the world. Some may consider it a tedious fetch-style quest, but it only took around 20 minutes to complete when I ran through it. And the experience I had while running through each of these shrines in the pilgrimage was also pretty fun. A lot of the shrines are located in beautiful areas or near interesting dungeons and NPCs, which a player might never encounter without another reason to do so. With all that out of the way, let's set out on the pilgrimage across Cyrodiil. As we run around and pray to each of these shrines, I think it's a good time to go over the lore we've learned so far, along with the 9 divines. Again, due to Oblivion being so old, it doesn't explain much in the way of lore, but instead lets the player gain that knowledge through the use of books. This is somewhat of a double-edged sword, as a player who doesn't care about the lore isn't forced to listen to it, but someone who does care has to go out of their way and read to figure out what's going on to the fullest. It can be a bit overwhelming, and a book or two can help clear up any confusion, so let's run through it here. As the prophet explained, the Order of the Knights of the Nine was founded in the Third Era with the intent of recovering the lost relics of the divine crusader Pelinal Whitestrake, who was killed while fighting the forces of the Ayleid king, Umaril the Unfeathered. The Ayleids were the first race to conquer the continent of Tamriel. They specifically ruled Cyrodiil, the section of Tamriel that we reside in and the game takes place in. The Ayleids enslaved humans there for thousands of years until an uprising was led by someone named Alicia, who upon her death had her soul made into the Amulet of Kings we see in game. That's a pretty cool tie-in. Also interesting to note, the Ayleids were the original founders of the Imperial City, and their ruins can be explored all across the continent in the form of dungeons for the player. If you've played Skyrim, these Ayleid ruins are akin to the Dwemer or Dwarven ruins you can find all over the world. Same concept, different ancient race. So back to the story. Although Pelinal thought he killed the Ayleid king Umaril, he did not. Umaril was half immortal, and rather than die, he was sent to the waters of Oblivion, basically Limbo, where he sat in waiting until his inevitable return with plans to enslave humans once again and regain control of Cyrodiil. So as the player, it is our job to find all of these divine relics originally used by Pelinal Whitestrake in his original battle and use them together to take down Umaril once and for all. But this time, with the power of the 9th god Talos on our side, we can follow Umaril into Oblivion and make sure he is dead for good. Hopefully that was a decent enough job explaining the lore. It gets really complex really fast. And even though this is a save the world type mission, I appreciate how it explains the Ayleids, the ruins all over the world, and sets the stage well for the impending battle. Some context on the game's dungeons that can be found outside the DLC adds a lot to the overall immersion when you're exploring. It's nice to know where these things come from, even at a basic level. So the humans were and still are avid worshippers of the divines, which is why there's one relic for each god. At the time of Pelinal's death there were 8, but the birth of the god Talos made them 9, and therefore he is the difference in our battle against Umaril this time around. The gods are a huge part of the world in every Elder Scrolls game, and again this quest does an excellent job of introducing them to the player while not making it overwhelming. The messages at each shrine match the ideology of each god, and the quests give a bit of insight into each god's domain, a great way for a new player to learn more about the world without all the lore of the gods of the world being given through a book. So we finally did it. With the pilgrimage complete and more lore than anyone had actually bargained for, we finished our quest. As soon as we pray at the Last Way Shrine, a voice calls to us, and it's none other than the man himself, Pelinal Whitestrake, who teleports us above the Imperial City to have a talk. Thematically and visually, this is super cool, but I'm kinda confused about how this ghost is even talking to us when I thought Pelinal was extremely dead. Nevertheless, he's here, and he tells us to continue on our mission by visiting the ancient shrine built upon his death, where we can find the first of the divine relics. It is really awesome to be standing above the Imperial City, just looking down on the world with Pelinal by your side, and it serves as a pretty epic moment, finally validating all the theories of Umaril and the impending doom the world has coming. So after our little chat, we head over to the dungeon Pelinal had directed us towards and begin the hunt for our first relic. I won't spend too much time running through this area as some parts are pretty generic, but overall it's a solid dungeon with a short but sweet design to it, and it feels again like the perfect dungeon for a beginner, offering a more simplistic layout and introduction to both ghosts and skeletons, which are the major early game enemies. Also, the location being underwater is a big plus for me. I think it's super cool and definitely adds to that feeling of the tomb not being explored for an extremely long amount of time, kind of making the dungeon feel less generic. Of note in this dungeon is the corpse of Sir Emil, a member of the Knights of the Nine who died centuries ago questing for the relics himself. By reading his journal, we find the location of his guild's old headquarters, which is then marked on our map. So with that, we say goodbye to our deceased friend and carry on through the dungeon, claiming our first of the divine relics, the Helm of the Crusader. After exiting the dungeon, we head to the surface and begin the journey to the Priory of the Nine, which is the group's original headquarters. I want to pause for a second to talk about the Priory. You'll note when you first step inside, it's actually pretty shit. Everything is broken, old, dirty, but as we move further through the quest, we'll see the Priory change and begin to thrive, becoming a great hub for a new player, or really any player at the time. I'm going to sound like a broken record, but especially for new players, it offers a bed, a blacksmith, and eventually a variety of followers to choose from, which can be super helpful early game. So stepping into the Priory, we're greeted by this rundown building that honestly is a bit creepy, but venturing into the basement by using Sir Emil's ring, we are greeted with one of my favorite murals in the game and the ghosts of some really pissed off knights. These are the boys, the original members of the Knights of the Nine, who all perished on their journeys to collect and protect their own relic of the Crusader. So we speak with Sir Emil, and he tells us we must prove our worthiness. We take on each of the knights in combat, which actually was a bit harder than I thought it would be. This was probably due to us being level 2 and me really not doing any grinding, just heading straight for this quest, but we got there in the end and thus were accepted into the group, allowed to continue our hunt for the relics along with receiving our second relic, the Curious of the Crusader. From here, two major things become available. First off, that armor rack in the back of the room. By putting our relics onto that rack, they instantly become repaired, and the stats will scale to our current level. The set of gear not only looks amazing, but has incredible stats with it, and actually changes from light to heavy based on which stats are higher for the player. Also, I don't know if it's just me, but it looks exactly like something out of Dark Souls, which kind of reminds me of Solaire, and I'm a huge fan of that. So in my eyes, this set of armor is a massive win. It really is a great resource for anyone who's at any point in the game. But especially for new players, broken record again, they now have access to a strong set of armor that scales with them through the game. So enchanted armor can be tough to repair in Oblivion, it's super expensive, and you can't really repair it on your own until you level up your armor skill. So if your build isn't somewhat optimized and you're not too sure what you're going with, aka someone new to the game, it's an invaluable resource to be able to get something that consistently scales with you and will help you along your journey, especially when things get tough. So the second thing that becomes available is a heap of quests from these knights, offering us a chance to collect their relic that they failed to protect in life. The variety of these quests is pretty impressive and we'll run through each, but this was a strong point for me when I was playing. It does feel like just getting 8 quests at once can be a bit overwhelming, but they're all pretty short and again target one relic, which makes them manageable and kind of makes the whole adventure broken down into bite-sized pieces. I am glad to say not all of these are just generic dungeon quests and actually pertain to either some lore of the knights or the gods who match their specific relic. In total, these knights offer the quests for our next 4 relics, all of which are interesting in their own right. We begin with the quest for the Gauntlet of the Crusader, the relic of Stendarr, god of righteous might and merciful forbearance. Sir Casimir explains we must speak to the priests in Choril's chapel to acquire the gauntlets. After getting him to divulge further into what originally had happened in his quest for the relic, we learned he had successfully obtained the item. The gauntlets were only lost when he had struck and accidentally killed a beggar within the chapel after being bothered repeatedly. When he landed his blow, the gauntlets slipped off, falling to the floor, unable to be moved by anyone who has tried since. Sir Casimir had disobeyed the god of might and mercy in his own sacred chapel. Losing the divine relic deserved punishment from the gods, and this could be seen in the fate of Sir Casimir's son Kellen, who we come to find out was cursed thanks to his father's actions, becoming sickly, bedridden, and incredibly weak. Digging around the chapel, we can speak to Aureldor, a worshipper of Stendarr, and we can also find the cursed boy himself, Kellen. With some dialogue between both, it becomes extremely clear that Aureldor has been withholding the secret to lifting this curse due to his unwillingness to confront the solution. One must take it upon themselves to release Kellen of his curse. Conveniently for Aureldor, we're the ones that are going to have to do that. So we go to Kellen and use the Lay on Hands spell to free him of his curse, cursing ourselves in the process. A lot of curse transfers going on. This self-infliction manifests itself in-game as a slow fatigue drain we will suffer into the near future, but by being selfless, we are rewarded, and the gauntlets are now under our possession, meaning we can continue on our adventure. This is an excellent quest in my opinion. It really shows the knights failing due to their human shortcomings and disobeying the gods, who in return are not merciful and they punish with a vengeance. Hearing Sir Casimir's regret in death and the suffering of his son really does make you feel for them. Also, it's good to know that the fatigue drain isn't that big of a deal, but I think it is a nice touch that actually puts some weight on the situation. It makes the curse feel real in-game and makes our sacrifice feel truly noble, causing the player some level of inconvenience even if it is extremely minor. It's a very short mission, but then again, it serves to break up these more dungeon-oriented questlines we've seen so far. These knights were no saints, just humans, and they failed in many ways beyond their inability to collect all the holy relics in life. So after returning to the Priory with the Gauntlets, we head out on our next mission for the Shield of the Crusader. Speaking to Sir Henrik, another one of the Knights of the Nine, we learn this is the artifact of Julianos, the god of wisdom and logic. The shield has been hidden by Sir Henrik in a fort for safekeeping, and according to him, last time he saw it, it was extremely well guarded. So with this information, we make our way to Fort Bulwark, and upon entering, it's quickly apparent the shield's former guardians are nowhere to be found. Taking their place is a group of conjurers, hell-bent on nabbing the shield for themselves, and they are currently in the process of exploring deeper and deeper into this underground maze, all in an attempt to find the holy shield. This area is littered with puzzles, booby traps, and all sorts of obstacles like gates, bridges, and the like. Overall, this dungeon's excellent. There's obviously a lot of care put into the design. The whole theme of these conjurers is actually awesome. They just continue to mine closer and closer, and as you go deeper and deeper into the dungeon, you can really feel what they've been doing. They also make a great setting, breaking up the more average skeleton and ghost enemies in favor of something that's a lot more fun to fight. So as we explore, we can find a few notes on the tables around the fort that give hints to our progress and confirm these conjurers have not yet made contact with the shield we so desire. Along our journey, we meet Sir Thedret. Locked in one of the cells, he is a prisoner of the cult and has obviously been here for some time. Thedret gives us a hint on how to get the shield when freed, and he can eventually become a knight himself, asking to join our cause upon the completion of this mission. This is a really good time to mention that on each quest for a relic, there's an accompanying NPC who will afterwards ask to join our cause, join the knights, and become a follower once the quest is done. For example, Scumbag Aureldor from the Gauntlets mission asks to join our ranks, realizing the error in his ways. Again, it's an awesome addition for new players. It gives options for all different types of companions and really builds the immersion of our guild's role within the world. It makes it feel like the guild is growing as we do and as we collect more of the holy relics. I know the companion system isn't the best in Oblivion, but it is nice to be able to pick and choose from a giant different group, and you'll make relationships with some of these characters, so it's fun to be able to contact them later. Sir Thedret, though, is especially important, because if we speak to him after we complete this quest, we can actually get a smith to show up at the Priory, who will repair our gear and weapons, which is super convenient. Just be sure to talk to Thedret before turning in the relic, as the smith will never show up again if you do this in the wrong order, thanks to a cool little bug in the game. Well, back to the quest, we've made our way through the dungeon, completing some really cool puzzles. There's this sorting or memory type of game, statues we need to properly align, and a trap of tiles you need to correctly navigate to dodge some darts. They're all pretty small, but they do add up to make the dungeon feel super memorable. I was especially impressed with the memory game. Obviously, the toolkit that Oblivion provides isn't the most impressive, but what they did with it for this puzzle in particular was really impressive to me. It was nothing like I'd seen in Oblivion up until that point. But beyond these puzzles, we also clear out swaths of conjurers, and eventually, we find the shield. Mission accomplished. Easy enough again. with a bit of a twist on your average dungeon. I would say this is by far the most in-depth relic quest we've seen thus far. Working our way back to the Priory, we're left with 2 more missions currently available. The quest for the Mace of the Crusader and the quest for the Boots of the Crusader. So the Mace is pretty interesting because on its own, the quest is incredibly easy. It takes only a few minutes to complete, but it can't be completed until we have the boots. I do like how the items interact with each other, and on my first playthrough, I attempted to get the mace over and over to no avail, until the game sort of told me, hey, you need another relic to do this. For now though, let's just take care of the boots and return to the mace after we become able to complete this mission. So the boots are the relic of goddess Kinnereth, ruler of the sea, elements, winds, and the unseen spirits of the air, basically the goddess of nature. This quest really plays into that, which I can appreciate. Also, just a side note, the shield of the Crusader we just got from that fort was the relic of Julianos, who's the god of wisdom and logic. It's pretty fitting that the god of wisdom and logic is where we need to solve a ton of puzzles to go and get it. Again, it's a nice little play on the god's relic or quest actually matching their sort of domain, which I think is a neat little touch. So to get these boots, we are told to go to Kinnereth's shrine, where the priestesses stand guard. Before obtaining them, we must prove ourselves worthy if we desire this relic. Upon arriving, we can speak to Anita Vesnia, the future knight or companion for this quest. She tells us we must pass the test of worthiness in the Grove of Trials to acquire the ancient relic. Well, when we mosey 5 feet to our left over to the grove, a nice little bear pops out of the woods and literally starts mauling us to death. But the trick to this quest is, get this, to allow the bear to kick the shit out of you until he's done. Thanks to Alan, our character, only being level 2, I had to use a few potions not to die, but we made it through just fine. After the bear had its time trying to murder us, he decides we're really not worth the time, and as long as we didn't fight back, we will be allowed to enter the newly opened cave behind us, where the boots will conveniently be sitting for us to grab. I thought this quest was super funny, and I did love what was here, but it was a bit underwhelming to take all of a few minutes to get the boots. I think I spent more time running to the shrine than I did actually partaking in this quest. The only real puzzle or sort of obstacle in our way was a bear smacking us around, and we couldn't even fight back, so I don't know how much of a puzzle you could even call that. Definite points for the flavor win, with the nature god having the nature theme to their quest, but overall I was pretty underwhelmed when we had just walked into the cave and grabbed the boots, especially after the full-on adventure we just had claiming the shield. Regardless, now that we have the boots, we can get on our way to find the final of the 4 relics in these quests. This is the shortest of all, and it's the Mace of the Crusader. This is the relic of Zenithar, god of work and commerce, and to be honest, there is 0 work or commerce involved in getting the mace. That being said, the quest is pretty interesting itself, because it's the only one to interact with another relic. So speaking to Sir Ralvis, back at the Priory, we learn he has tried the challenge of Zenithar thousands of times in his life, but all to no avail. The challenge can be found in the chapel at Leowin, within the Undercroft. There we must kneel at the shrine to be tested, and use faith as our guide to succeed. Well, I think there was a reason Sir Ralvis failed the challenge so many times, and that's because faith just is not gonna cut it. Normally when we kneel to the shrine, we're teleported into some sort of alternate world, where we can see the mace on a raised platform right in front of us. The problem? The giant gap between us and that platform, and I don't think all the faith in the world is getting us across. So try as we might to send it over, it just doesn't work. The trick here is to equip the boots we conveniently grabbed right before this, and boom. A bridge forms showing us the way to the mace, and we can now grab them and are thus teleported out of this alternate world. But as we summon back into the real world, the chapel is in the middle of an attack. Ayleid soldiers are attempting to murder everyone in the building, so we must fight them off before we can leave. I will admit the fight's pretty cool, and it did catch me by surprise both times I played through. I can even appreciate the tie-in of the multiple relics being needed for the quest. In the lore, Kinnereth, the goddess we got our boots from, and Zenithar, the god tied to the mace, were actually extremely close, working with one another often. But overall, I'd say this quest is a pretty big letdown. The whole thing really just boils down to a chump check of, do you have the boots or not? Teleporting to the alternate world is super cool, and I love the setup of Ralvis failing thousands of times in his life. It's exciting, but the end result really just doesn't do it for me. And I tested it, you can't run across the bridge without the boots. Even if you know where it is, there really is no other solution. Seeing the world you teleport to, I couldn't help think about some other parkour challenge, puzzle, fights, anything really, that could have fit much better. There's nothing here other than equipping the boots and walking 5 steps. A bit of hidden lore on the game though. There's a model of the sleeping giant you can view when using an editor. He is revealed in the area of the mace, and is seemingly meant to be a massive corpse floating above the mace. But he's disabled, doesn't appear in the rest of the quest, and this really leads me to believe that there was some cut content for the relic. Well, with that real doozy of a mission out of the way, we are up to 6 of the 8 relics, and have completed each quest the knights had for us. Returning to the priory, we are met with Lathon, a squire of Sir Roderick, who is frantically telling us that Roderick has been killed. If you don't remember Sir Roderick, it's because I never mentioned him. He is one of the Knights of the Nine who is still alive. He was questing for the relics at the same time we were. There's a chance you could have met him traveling along the pilgrimage to each shrine early on in these missions, but playing through the quest line twice back to back, I met him once. So there really is a chance that you could completely miss out on seeing Roderick. It's definitely confusing when this guy storms in all distraught over Roderick's death when you haven't even met the guy, and I would have liked an added part where your interaction with Roderick was guaranteed. Regardless, Lathon explains that the knight has been slain questing for, you guessed it, the relics of the Crusader. We're given a brief explanation on the last 2 relics. The Greaves of the Crusader were found by Roderick and Lathon, who is kind enough to give them to us when we're speaking. The final relic, the Sword of the Crusader, was said to be in the tomb of Sir Beric, and when Roderick was exploring, he found the tomb was not actually a tomb, but an ancient keep corrupted by Lord Vlindrel, who's the one responsible for Roderick's death and has possession over the sword, our final required relic. This is a great setup for the end of the story. We get some background on the dungeon, the boss, and a good motive to fight: the death of Sir Roderick. I just wish he played a bigger role before he died, as it's really tough to feel for him as a player when our characters may have crossed paths for about 5 seconds through this entire story. Imagine if we had met over and over as we gathered more relics, we learned more of his adventures and his personal quest. That would really add to the feel and overall immersion of this questline. Nevertheless, we're set out on our way to Underpall Cave with the mission of recovering our final relic. When we arrive, it becomes apparent that Sir Lathon has actually followed us and plans on assisting in our mission. But I don't really think Lathon was meant for the whole nightlife, as he dies in 5 minutes in the dungeon to a single skeleton. Although we are a stealth build, so he was kinda holding us back, but RIP. As we continue onward and fight through hordes of undead foes, it becomes clear that this is the most straightforward of the dungeons we've faced so far, and I really don't mind that. For a level 2 like Alan, it's got some challenging fights, and it can provide ample build-up to the boss battle we're inevitably going to face. If I was to nitpick though, I think there's a lot of opportunity for more creative execution. I mean, the premise is great. A corrupted spirit in the evil keep stopping us from our final mission. I just would have loved to see some named NPCs or custom enemies throughout the dungeon to add a bit of spice and personality, kind of like we saw in the Shield quest. It is a pretty short area though, and we make our way through eventually. After stepping over the body of Sir Roderick himself, may he rest in peace, we make it to a small wooden door that opens up to reveal a large chamber housing an underground lake and the man himself, the evil spirit Lord Vlindrel. Now this guy's pretty tough, and I highly recommend not fighting him by the lake, as the relic he uses, our precious Sword of the Crusader, can drop into the water when he's killed, forcing the player to swim around aimlessly looking for it. I actually love that from a design perspective, and it is a neat possibility only some players may face depending on how you take the fight. The open room and long angles provide time to strategize and take on the battle in a multitude of ways. If you're a scumbag like me though, there's never been a plan to approach. We just sit back and rip pot shots at this poor fool until he dies. Truly a master tactician. So we grab the sword off the Lord's corpse and come to learn it's been corrupted, and we need to take it to the Chapel of Arkai to consecrate it to the original holy form. The first time playing, my dumbass thought it would be an amazing idea to equip an obviously cursed sword. The price? Our character gains Lord Vlindrel's curse, making it so we don't regenerate magicka, and we gain 100% weakness to poison, fire, frost, and shock magic. A pretty nasty effect. Thankfully, I learned from my past mistakes, and we leave the dungeon and get to the Chapel of Arkai, where we can remove this awful curse. But before we get the chance to do so, Umaril's minions once again attack. Who could have saw this coming? We must defend another chapel from invaders. This battle's pretty easy, and once we defeat Umaril's goons, we cleanse the sword and ourselves, collecting the final relic of the Crusader and completing our set. The mission for the sword is honestly solid. Again, the dungeon could have been a bit more interesting, but a strong final battle helps make up for this. Also, these chapel attacks will never cease to surprise me. Even if I make jokes about it, it does come as a shock when people are constantly being slain as we enter a new building. In this case, it serves as a cool way to punish the player for trying to equip the cursed sword, forcing an encounter before we have the chance to remove its effects. Not too bad, Oblivion. With all the relics in hand, all that is left for us to do is to return to the Priory, where the Prophet, our old friend, and our new knight army await our arrival. It's time for the final battle, to decide the fate of the universe. It is time to take on Umaril. We head to the chapel where the Prophet is waiting for us, and he explains the battle is on. But this time, it will be different. This time, Umaril will not escape. The power of the ninth god Talos will allow us to follow Umaril back into the waters of Oblivion and kill him once and for all, making sure he never comes back. I want to pause for a second to talk about how cool Talos is in this context. So when Pelennor Whitestrake, the original knight that fought Umaril, went into battle, there were 8 divines, 8 total gods that ruled over the world. But since the death of Tiber's septum had occurred, and it is believed through the power of hero souls, Tiber ascended to godhood, becoming the 9th divine. This makes him incredibly popular to groups like the Imperial Legion and Nords of Skyrim. He was a true hero and champion, a man turned god, and with his blessing, we now have the power needed to truly defeat Umaril. So with all the boys gassed up over the finale of our quest, we set off to Umaril's HQ, the last bastion for the Ayleids, Garlus, Malatar. This is a pretty massive base, far out of the way of anything else you might have explored up to this point. And when we arrive, we give the signal to launch our attack. The knights charge forward and we storm the base, fighting through waves and waves of Umaril's minions is what I would say if that's what happened. Realistically, the knights do all the work for us, clearing out the few enemies in our path while we sit back and relax. It's actually more of an issue trying to fight these guys, because if you accidentally hit a friendly knight, there's a chance they glitch out and become hostile towards the player, forcing you to reset to your last save game and try again. While it is plagued with glitches and a poor design for what Oblivion offers, the moment is still pretty epic. As we enter the dungeon, we clear out rooms of Ayleids until we make it to the Cursed Orb, which has the power to resurrect any of the enemies we kill. So from here, we ride solo, taking an alternate path to climb up to the orb and destroy it, forcing us into a 1v1 battle with the king himself, Umaril. Oh, here he is. Oh, he hits like a bus, dude. Holy shit, we're almost dead. We put all this shit on the floor, man. I can't path properly. Uh-oh. This guy hits like a bus and does actually pose a challenge if you're not super over leveled. Note me running away like a giant baby, throwing out arrows and dodging massive attacks. After some long kiting and some close calls, we are able to slay the king. But this was just his human form, and by using the blessings of Talos, we can teleport to the spiritual plane, following Umaril for the true finale. We're actually gonna run out of arrows. After a few blows, and I really do mean a few, we take down our foe, falling to the ground with him and completing our holy quest. We arise in the Priory, being greeted by the knights who thank us for our efforts and offer their blessings in the future. Truly an epic end to an epic quest. I will say the whole blessing of Talos is busted. It gives major stat buffs and makes our final duel in that spirit plane a lot easier than I had thought it should be. But otherwise, for what Oblivion offers as a set of tools, I think this was a solid end to our adventure. So that's it. We are now the Divine Crusader within the Knights of the Nine. And what do we have to show for it? Well, actually a lot. In just 4 short hours of questing, we managed to defeat a god and save the planet, secure a holy set of armor more powerful than anything we could have imagined that grows with us as we carry through the rest of our time in game. We came across a shit ton of future followers, all trained knights with different combat styles, and gained a new base of operations, allowing us to have access to a smith, bed, storage, and anything we could need in a home. What a rewarding journey this questline is. Not to mention the powers like the Blessing of Talos and the buffs we can receive by visiting the tombs of any of the previous knights we met. Really, we just set ourselves up for one hell of a game. All of our bases are covered through this questline, while also exploring each major city on our pilgrimage and becoming fully accustomed to the new world. I think Oblivion can be a lot to a new player. Someone used to the streamlined experience of a game like Skyrim, where everything is much more direct and laid out for you. But in my opinion, Knights of the Nine is the best questline and content in this game, because it sets up players to enjoy this game, and I hope I showed you just a bit of why that's the case. Thank you so much for watching, and especially if you made it this far to the end. Please consider liking, subbing, dropping a comment on what else you'd like to see or how this format could change. Have a beautiful day everyone, and peace out.